Welcome to another story made by Oracle One. Thomas Blake was a man defined by frequency. Since his youth, he was fascinated with sound not just as noise, but as a complex language layered beneath everyday life. The gentle scratching of a vinyl record, the subtle hum behind a whispered conversation. All of it told stories that few could understand. Now, as a seasoned audio engineer in the winding corridors of Carver Studios, he lived surrounded by waves and echoes, a guardian of clearness in a world corrupted by interference. His days consisted of hours behind mahogany consoles, adjusting equalizers, removing pops, dips, and any trace of distortion. The studio was his sanctuary, a place where sound became art, each file a living thing that deserved respect. But for nearly 6 months now, Thomas was plagued by a curious and unsettling phenomenon. No matter what recording he played, no matter how clear the source, he would hear a second voice. Always beneath the main track, faint but undeniably present. It started subtly, almost as if his mind was playing tricks. He first noticed it while mastering a late-night radio talk show. There was the host's familiar tone, sharp and commanding, yet layered underneath was a whisper, low and fragmented, barely caught on the wings of sound. At first, he thought it was a technical glitch, a coincidental echo of a previous recording or an overlapping channel. But it happened again and again, with every file he listened to. Interviews, music sessions, even ambient recordings. And the voices, there were always multiple ones, different accents, some speaking in sentences, others producing words impossible to discern but undeniably deliberate. This phenomenon made Thomas restless. He tried everything, recalibrating equipment, changing headphones, consulting with old colleagues who pointed to auditory pareidolia, a trick of the brain where the mind imposes meaning on random noise. But Thomas was sure this was no hallucination. The voices were undeniably real. Real enough to pull him deeper down the rabbit hole of audio beneath audio. One rain-soaked evening, tired from wrestling with a particularly complex file from an underground punk band's rehearsal, Thomas sat in the dim glow of the studio monitors. The muffled drumbeats and muted guitar riffs played softly around him. He switched between filters, isolating frequencies, boosting treble, cutting bass, trying to bring the second voice to the front like a ghost pressed against a door. The whisper grew clearer, but so did the sense of dread. It wasn't gibberish. It was a voice speaking in a language he couldn't place. It sounded almost like a plea, strained and desperate. His skin prickled involuntarily as the voice repeatedly hissed the words, "They're watching." Thomas reached for the microphone to record this isolated voice, but as he brought the levels up, the whisper abruptly stopped. The only sound left was the raw punk track cracking beneath his resolve. This sudden silence unsettled him. Had he imagined it? The second voice, was it some kind of subliminal message? Some encrypted threat hidden deep inside recordings? Paranoia crept in. Thomas queried the band's manager, who scoffed at conspiracy theories. The sound files checked out as clean, with no evidence of tampering. But Thomas couldn't let this go. He began collecting random recordings from old radio broadcasts, forgotten tapes salvaged from flea markets, even files from his own personal life. The voices were always there. Always the same undertone of anxiety and warning, sometimes joy, sometimes despair. One voice sounded distinctly female, telling stories of being trapped, crying softly about the cold rooms. Another was masculine, terse and cautioning, mentioning the experiment and don't trust them. Everything was a jigsaw puzzle with pieces missing. Unable to fathom it alone, Thomas reached out to Aidan Grant, a cryptologist who specialized in code breaking and linguistics. Skeptical but intrigued, Aidan agreed to analyze the clips Thomas sent. For days, Aidan listened, slowed the speech, and ran spectral analyses. The voice patterns were irregular but showed signs of deliberate phonetic construction, resembling a broken code layered beneath ordinary conversations. When he finally pieced fragments together, Aiden's eyes widened. "These aren't just voices," he told Thomas. "They're messages, concealed in a technique called audio-steganography, hiding data inside sound. But this is advanced, purposeful. Someone designed this to communicate in secret." Thomas felt a surge of both relief and terror. Someone had sent these messages intentionally through recordings meant for public ears. "Who?" Thomas asked, voice barely above a whisper. "There's more," Aiden said, pulling records and archives from his laptop. Some European intelligence experiments in the 50s and 60s tried embedding psychological operations inside broadcast media. Mind control, subliminal suggestion. They tested this on radio waves, TV signals. He glanced at Thomas gravely. "Maybe these are leftovers. Or worse, a live communication." Unable to shake the feeling of being watched, Thomas decided to capture fresh audio, to record ambient sound from Carver Studio overnight, hoping to catch new messages in real time. He set the console to record everything: the soft flick of his room's old heater, distant thunder, the occasional creak of the building settling. Hours passed and dawn was creeping along the city skyline when the studio phone rang, sharp and shrill in the quiet. Thomas jumped but ignored it, fearing distraction. That's when he heard it. A voice, clear and deliberately close in his ears, whispering, "Listen carefully." Shaking, Thomas rewound the recording. The main audio was silent, just the hum of night. Yet layered beneath was the breathy whisper, unmistakably human: "They're coming. The listener is the key. Find the truth." A new puzzle had just landed in his lap. Over the following days, Thomas combed through his recordings, guided by the hidden voice's curse-like phrase. He found subtle patterns, notes played on certain piano keys, static bursts resembling Morse code, and rhythmic pulses that corresponded with coordinates. He cross-referenced the coordinates, leading him to a disused warehouse on the outskirts of the city. Night cloaked the building in shadows as Thomas approached, a tormented mixture of dread and curiosity swelling in him. The warehouse was abandoned, filled with the dust and decay of forgotten machinery. Yet in the corner, an old reel-to-reel tape player sat plugged in, buzzing faintly as if waiting for someone to press play. Thomas plunged into the task of deciphering the latest tapes. What poured out was chilling. Voices of long-gone victims, whispers of escape attempts, confessions overridden with static. Names he could barely pronounce. Their fears narrated in desperation. A chilling testament to unimaginably clandestine experiments conducted within these walls decades ago. More than once, Thomas was convinced the second voice in recordings was the echo of their final pleas for release. But the mystery deepened with every reel. Hidden within the static was a pattern of dates and times hinting the experiments weren't just historical. Some tapes referenced current years, locations he recognized, and cryptic warnings about the darkness beneath the surface. Haunted by this revelation, Thomas contacted an investigative journalist named Grace Monroe, known for exposing government cover-ups. Together they uncovered news articles, old whistleblower testimonies, and redacted documents hinting that a secret society had weaponized sound waves to control populations. The second voice was their unintended side effect, a byproduct of broken signals resonating through decades. As Thomas and Grace dug deeper, strange things began happening. Unmarked black cars prowled their apartment streets. Shadows flickered in the corners of their vision. At night, Thomas heard the whisper again, saying, "They know you're listening." Pushed to his limits, Thomas decided to confront the source directly, a move that plunged him into the bowels of a derelict underground facility beneath the city. Inside, he found tangled wires, fading monitors, and a wall of speakers cracked and dusty but humming with life. Then, unmistakably, the hidden voice spoke again, emerging from the speakers, clearer than ever. The listener has arrived. A figure stepped through the shadows, face obscured but voice calm and composed. "I've been waiting for you, Thomas Blake." The man introduced himself as Dr. Calvert, a former scientist who had tried to expose the experiments years before being silenced and erased from records. He explained that the voices Thomas heard were survivors' echoes trapped in experimental broadcasts designed to manipulate minds across generations. They were calling out through the frequencies, waiting for a listener to set them free. "You've decoded their pain, their cries," Calvert said. "But it's dangerous. There are forces still active, still trying to keep the truth buried. They'll come for you." Thomas looked at the maze of dusty control panels, realizing the depth of conspiracy was far more intricate than he imagined. The voices in every recording were a broken chain of trapped souls fighting to be heard. With Grace joining him, Thomas set out to broadcast the recordings and their coded messages using a live stream, hoping the digital age could finally break the silence. As the broadcast played worldwide, people began hearing what Thomas had discovered: the hidden voices, the warnings, the cries from the past and present. The world shuddered with revelations of decades of hidden psychological warfare layered into culture itself. But just as the broadcast was reaching millions, the stream abruptly cut to static. Thomas's phone buzzed with an unknown number. He answered to hear the faint whisper echo one last time: "The listener has freed us. Now, be vigilant. They are always listening." In that moment, Thomas understood that listening changed everything. It granted power, responsibility, and a terrifying awareness of unseen watchers embedded within the very sounds that shaped reality. The voices persisted, but they no longer spoke only of fear. They spoke of hope. For more stories, like and subscribe.